Dum dum da dum dum da dum 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 dum. Yeah, buddy, here we are again with chapter 3 of the Anecdota of Procopius. Ah, this is one exhausted cow. We're on the quarantine with coronavirus and just holed up in the house, laid off from my school teaching job, but not laid off. It's like we don't want to, lay you off. We're just gonna lay you off, but you still have a job, so you're not laid off. So, okay. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next thrilling, exciting, ebullient, effervescent, scintillating, illuminating, effulgent episode of a section of the chapter The Anecdota of Procopius with the reading cow for the world with bedtime stories for the baby thing show that this is. So we continue. 3. Showing the danger of interfering with a woman's intrigues. We saw that danger last time, if you remember that. What it was, Macedonia, the lady. Yeah, terrible. Okay. You have to see it there, folks. Can't see that here. On his return to Roman territory, Belisarius found his wife just arriving from Constantinople. He put her under guard in disgrace, and often was on the point of putting her to death, but each time he weakened, overcome, I suppose, by the rekindling of his love for her, or lust, shall we say. But they say he was also driven from his senses by philters she gave him, her magic powers. Meanwhile, the outraged Photius had gone to Ephesus, taking the eunuch Caligulus, pander for his mistress, with him in chains and under the whip. During the course of his journey, Caligulus confessed all his lady's secrets, but Theodosius again learned of his peril and fled to the church of St. John the Apostle, which is the holiest and most revered sanctuary thereabouts. However, Andrew, bishop of Ephesus, was bribed by Photius to give the man up into his hands. So much for sanctuary. Theodora was now in some fear of Antonina, for she had heard what had happened to her. So she sent word to Belisarius to bring his wife to Constantinople. Photius, hearing this, sent Theodosius to Cilicia, where his own lancers and shield-bearers happened to be wintering, enjoining upon those who took him thither to do so as secretly as possible, and on arriving in Cilicia, to hide him privately in the garrison, letting no one know where in the world he was. Then, with Caligulus and Theodosius' considerable moneys, Photius went to Constantinople. Now the empress gave evidence to all mankind that for every murder to which she was indebted she could pay in greater and even more savage requital. For Antonina had betrayed for her one enemy when she had lately ensnared the Cappadocian, but she ruined for Antonina's sake a number of blameless men, some of Belisarius's and Photius's acquaintances she put to the torture, when the only charge against them was that they were friends of the two. And to this day, we do not know what was their ultimate fate. And others she banished into exile on the same accusation. One man who had accompanied Photius to Ephesus, a senator who was also named Theodosius, not only lost his property, but was thrown into a dungeon, where he was fastened to a manger by a rope around his neck so short that the noose was always tight and could not be slackened. Consequently, the poor man had to stand at the manger all the time, whether he ate or sought sleep or performed the other needs of the body. The only difference between him and an ass was that he could not bray. The time the man passed in this condition was not less than 4 months, after which, overcome by melancholy, he went mad. And as such, they set him free to die. The reluctant Belisarius she forced to become reconciled with his wife, while Photius, after she had him tortured like a slave and scourged on the back and shoulders, was ordered to tell where Theodosius and the pander were. But in spite of his anguish at the torture, he kept silent as he had sworn to do, though he had always been delicate and sickly, and had to be very careful of his health, and was hitherto inexperienced in such outrage and ill-treatment. Yet none of Belisarius' secrets did he divulge. Later, however, everything that up to this time had been concealed came to light. Discovering Caligulus in the neighborhood, Theodora handed him over to Antonina, and then Theodosius brought back to Constantinople, where she hid him in her palace. On the day after his arrival, she sent for Antonina. "My dearest lady," she said, "a pearl fell into my hands yesterday, such a one as no mortal has ever seen. If you wish, I will not grudge you a sight of this jewel, but will show it to you." Not knowing what had happened, her friend begged Theodora to show her the pearl, and the empress, leading Theodosius from the rooms of one of the eunuchs, revealed him. For a moment, Antonina, speechless with joy, remained dumb. Then she broke into an ecstasy of gratitude, and called Theodora her savior, her benefactress, and her true mistress. Thereafter the empress kept Theodosius in the palace, wrapping him in every luxury, and declared she would even make him general of all the Roman forces before long. Justice, however, intervened. Carried off by dysentery, he disappeared from the world of men. Dysentery, folks. Dysentery. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Okay. Now in Theodora's palace were certain secret dungeon rooms, dark, unknown, and remote, wherein there was no difference between day and night. In one of these Photius languished for a long time. He had the good fortune, however, to escape, not once, but twice. The first time he took refuge in the Church of the Virgin Mother, which is the most holy and famous of the churches in Constantinople, and there took his place at the sacred table as a suppliant. But she captured him even there and had him removed by force. The second time he fled to the church of Saint Sophia and sought sanctuary at the Holy Font, which of all places the Christians most reverence. Yet even from here the woman was able to drag him, for to her no spot was too awful or venerable to transgress, and she thought nothing of violating all the sanctuaries put together. Like all the rest of the people, the Christian priests were struck dumb with horror, but stood to one side and suffered her to do as she willed. Whoa. Now for 3 years Photius remained thus in his cell, and then the prophet Zechariah came to him in a dream and ordered him in the name of the Lord to escape, promising him aid in this. Trusting in the vision, he broke loose again, and unnoticed by anyone made his way to Jerusalem. Though he passed through countless thousands of men on his flight, not one of them saw the youth. There he shaved his head, assumed the garb of the monks, and was free at last from the punishment of Theodora. But Belisarius, disregarding his word of honor, took no measures to avenge his accomplice's suffering of such impious treatment as had been told, and all of his military expeditions from this time on failed, presumably by the will of God. For his next campaign against Khosroes and the Medes, who were for the third time invading Roman territory, was severely criticized, though one good thing was said of him, that he had driven the foe back. But when Khosroes crossed the Euphrates River, took the great city of Callinicus without a battle, and enslaved myriads of Roman citizens, while Belisarius was careful not even to pursue the enemy when he retired, he won the reputation of being one of two things, either a traitor or a coward. 4. How Theodora humiliated the conqueror of Africa and Italy. Soon after this, a further disaster befell him. The plague, which I have described elsewhere, became epidemic at Constantinople. The plague! And the Emperor Justinian was taken grievously ill. It was even said that he had died of it. Rumors spread this report till it reached the Roman army camp, where some of the officers said if the Romans tried to establish anyone else at Constantinople as emperor, they would never recognize him. Presently the emperor's health bettered, and the officers of the army brought charges against each other. The generals Peter and John the Glutton, alleging they had heard Belisarius and Buzes making the above declaration. this hypothetical mutiny, the indignant queen took as intended by the two men to refer to herself. So she recalled all the officers to Constantinople to investigate the matter, and she summoned Boozies impromptu to her private quarters on the pretext she was to discuss with him matters of sudden urgency. Now, underneath the palace was an underground cellar, secure and labyrinthian, comparable to the infernal regions in which most of those who gave offense to her were eventually entombed. And so Buzes was thrown into this oubliette, and there the man, though of consular rank, remained with no one cognizant of his fate. Neither as he sat there in darkness could he ever know whether it was day or night, nor could he learn from anyone else, for the man who each day threw him his food was dumb, and the scene was that of one wild beast confronting another. Everybody soon thought him dead, but no one dared to mention even his memory. But after 2 years and 4 months, Theodora took pity on the man and released him. Ever after, he was half blind and sick in body. This is what she did to Buzes. Belisarius, although none of the charges against him were proved, was, at the insistence of the empress, relieved of his command by the emperor, who appointed Martinus in his place as general of the armies of the East. Belisarius's lancers and shield-bearers and such of his servants as were of military use he ordered to be divided between the other generals and certain of the palace eunuchs. Drawing lots for these men and their arms, they portioned them as the chances fell, and his friends and all who formerly had served him were forbidden ever to visit Belisarius. It was a bitter sight, and no one would ever have thought credible to see Belisarius, a private citizen in Constantinople, almost deserted, melancholy and miserable of countenance, and ever expectant of a further conspiracy to accomplish his death. Then the empress learned he had acquired great wealth in the East, and sent one of the eunuchs of the palace to confiscate it. Antonina, as I have told, was now quite out of temper with her husband, but on the most friendly and intimate terms with the queen, since she had got rid of John of Cappadocia. So, to please Antonina, Theodora arranged everything so that the wife would appear to have asked mercy for her husband, and from such peril to have saved his life. And the poor wretch not only became quite reconciled to her, but let her make him her humblest slave for having saved him from the queen. And this is how that happened. One morning, Belisarius went to the palace, as usual, with his few and pitiful followers. Finding the emperor and empress hostile, he was further insulted in their presence by base-born and common men. Late in the evening he went home, often turning around as he withdrew and looking in every direction for those who might be advancing to put him to death. Accompanied by his dread, he entered his home and sat down alone upon his couch, his spirit broken. He failed even to remember the time when he was a man. Sweating, dizzy, and trembling, he counted himself lost, devoured by slavish fears and mortal worry. He was completely emasculated. Antonina, who neither knew just what arrangement of his fate had been made, nor much cared what would become of him, was walking up and down nearby, pretending a heartburn, for they were not exactly on friendly terms. Meanwhile, an officer of the palace, Quadratus by name, had come as the sun went down, and passing through the outer hall, suddenly stood at the door of the men's apartments to say he had been sent there by the empress. And when Belisarius heard that, he drew up his arms and legs onto the couch and lay down on his back, ready for the end. So far had all manhood left him. Quadratus, however, approached only to hand him a letter from the queen, and thus the letter read: You know, sir, your offense against us, but because I am greatly indebted to your wife, I have decided to dismiss all charges against you and give her your life. So, for the future, you may be of good cheer as to your personal safety and that of your property, but we shall know by what happens to you how you conduct yourself toward her. When Belisarius read this, intoxicated with joy and yearning to give evidence of his gratitude, he leapt from his couch and prostrated himself at the feet of his wife, with each hand fondling one of her legs, licking with his tongue the sole of first one of her feet and then the other. He cried that she was the cause of his life and of his safety, Henceforth he would be her faithful slave instead of her lord and master. The empress then gave 30 gold centenaries of his property to the emperor, and returned what was left to Belisarius. This is what happened to the great general, to whom destiny had not long before given both Gelimer and Vitiges to be captives of his spear. But the wealth that this subject of theirs had acquired had long ago gnawed jealous wounds in the hearts of Justinian and Theodora, who deemed it grown too big for any of the imperial coffers, any but the imperial coffers. And they said that he had concealed most of Gelimer's and Vitiges' monies, which by conquest belonged to the state, and had handed over only a small fraction, hardly worth accepting by an emperor. Yet, when they counted the labors the man had accomplished, and the cries of reproach they might arouse among the people, since they had no credible pretext for punishing him, they kept their peace, until now, when the empress, discovering him out of his senses with terror, at one fell stroke managed to become mistress of all his fortune. To tie him further to her, she betrothed Joannina, Belisarius' only daughter, to Anastasius, her nephew. Belisarius now asked to be given back his old command, and as general of the east lead the Roman armies once more against Chosroes and the Medes, but Antonina would not hear of it. It was there she had been insulted by him before, she said, and she never wanted to see the place again. Accordingly, Belisarius was instead made Count of the Imperial Remounts, and fared forth a second time to Italy, agreeing with the emperor, they say, not to ask him at any time for money towards this war, but to prepare all the military equipment from his private purse. Now everybody took it for granted that Belisarius had arranged with his wife and made the agreement about the expedition with the emperor, merely so as to get away from this humiliating position in Constantinople, and that as soon as he had gotten outside the city, he intended to take up arms and retaliate nobly as becomes a man against his wife and those who had done him wrong. Instead, he made light of all he had experienced, forgot or discounted his word of honor to Photius and his other friends, and followed his wife about in perfect ecstasy of love, and that when she had now arrived at the age of 60 years. Go figure. However, as soon as he arrived in Italy, some new and different trouble happened with each fresh day, for even Providence had turned against him. For the plans this general had laid in the former campaign against Theodatus and Vitiges, though they did not seem to be fitting to the event, usually turned out to his advantage, while now, though he was credited with laying better plans, as was to be expected after his previous experience in warfare, they all turned out badly, so that the final judgment was that he had no sense of strategy. There you go. Indeed, it is not by the plans of men, but by the hand of God that the affairs of men are directed. There he put it in writing. And this men call fate, not knowing the reason for what things they see occur. And what seems to be without cause is easy to call the accident of chance. Still, this is a matter every mortal will decide for himself according to his taste. 5. How Theodora tricked the general's daughter. From the second expedition to Italy, Belisarius brought back nothing but disgrace. For the entire 5 years of the campaign, he was unable to set foot on that land, as I have related in my former books, because there was no tenable position there, but all this time sailed up and down along the coast. Totila, indeed, was willing enough to meet him before his city walls, but could not catch him there, since, like the rest of the Roman army, he was afraid to fight. Wherefore Belisarius recovered nothing of what had been lost, but even lost Rome in addition, and everything else, if there were anything left to lose. His mind was filled with avarice during this time, and he thought of nothing but base gain. Since he had been given no funds by the emperor, he plundered nearly all the Italians living in Ravenna and Sicily, and whatever else he found opportunity, collecting a bill, as it were, for which those who dwelt there were in no way responsible. Sure, that was popular. Thus he even went to Herodian and asked him for money, and his threat so enraged Herodian that he rebelled against the Roman army and gave his services with those of his followers in the city of Spoletum to Totila and the Goths. That's what happened. And now I shall show how it came about that Belisarius and John, nephew of Attilian, became estranged, a division that brought great disaster to Roman affairs. Now so thoroughly did the empress hate Germanus, and so conspicuously, that no one dared to become a relative of his, though he was the nephew of the emperor. His sons remained unmarried while she lived, and his daughter Justina, though in the flower of 18 summers, was still unwedded. Consequently, when John sent by Belisarius arrived in Constantinople, Germanus was forced to approach him as a possible son-in-law, though John was not at all worthy in station of such an alliance. But when they had come to an agreement, they bound each other by most solemn oaths to complete the alliance by all means in their power, and this was necessary because neither had any confidence in the good faith of the other. For John knew he was seeking a marriage far above his rank, and Germanus feared that even this man might try to slip out of the contract. The empress, of course, was unable to contain herself at this, and in every way, by every possible device, however unworthy, tried to hinder the event. When, for all her menaces, she was unable to deter either of them, she publicly threatened to put John to death. After this, on John's return to Italy, fearing Antonina might join the plot against him, he did not dare to meet Belisarius until she left for Constantinople. That Antonina had been charged by the queen to help murder him, no one could have thought unlikely, and when he considered Antonina's habits and Belisarius's enslavement by his wife, John was as greatly as he was reasonably alarmed. The Roman expedition, already on its last legs, now collapsed entirely, and this is how Belisarius concluded the Gothic War. In despair, he begged the emperor to let him come home as fast as he could sail. And when he received the monarch's permission to do this, he left straightway in high spirits, bidding a long farewell to the Roman army and to Italy. He left almost everything in the power of the enemy. And while he was on his way home, Perugia, hard-pressed by a most bitter siege, was captured and submitted to every possible misery, as I have elsewhere related. As if this were not enough, he suffered a further personal misfortune in the following manner. The Empress Theodora, desiring to marry the daughter of Belisarius to her nephew, worried the girl's parents with frequent letters. To avoid this alliance, they delayed the ceremony until they could both be present at it, and then, when the Empress summoned them to Constantinople, pretended they were unable at the time to leave Italy. But the queen was still determined her nephew should be the master of Belisarius's wealth, for she knew his daughter would inherit it, as Belisarius had no other child. Yet she had no confidence in Antonina, and fearing that after her own life was ended, Antonina would not be loyal to her house, for all that she had been so helpful in the empress's emergencies, and that she would break the agreement, Theodora did an unholy thing. She made the boy and girl live together without any ceremony, and they say she forced the girl against her will to submit to his clandestine embrace, so that being thus deflowered, the girl would agree to the marriage, and the emperor could not forbid the event. However, after the first ravishing, Anastasius and the girl fell warmly in love with each other, and for not less than 8 months continued their unmarital relations. But when, after Theodora's death, Antonina came to Constantinople, she was unwilling to forget the outrage the queen had committed against her, not bothering at the fact that if she united her daughter to any other man, she would be making an ex-prostitute out of her. She refused to accept Theodora's nephew as son-in-law, and by force tore the girl, ignoring her fondest pleadings, from the man she loved. For this act of senseless obstinacy she was universally censured. Yet, when her husband came home, she easily persuaded him to approve her course, which should have openly disclosed the character of the man. Still, though he had pledged himself to Photius and others of his friends, and then broken his word, there were plenty who sympathized with him, for they thought the reason of his perjury was not uxoriousness, but his fear of the empress. But after Theodora died, as I have told, he still took no thought of Photius or any of his friends, and it was clear he called Antonina his mistress and Caligulus the pander his master. And then all men saw his shame, made him a public laughingstock, and reviled him to his face as a nitwit. Now was the folly of Belisarius completely revealed. The madness. As for Sergius, son of Bacchus, and his misdeeds in Libya, I have described that affair sufficiently in my chapter elsewhere on the subject. Now he was most guilty for the disaster there to Roman power, and how he disregarded the gospel oath he had sworn to the Levitae, and criminally put to death their 80 ambassadors. So there remains for me to add now only this, that neither did these men come to Sergius with any intention of treachery, nor did Sergius have any suspicion that they did. But nevertheless, after inviting them to a banquet under the pledge of safety, he put them shamefully to death. This resulted in the loss of Solomon, the Roman army, and all the Libyans. For, consequent to this affair, especially after Solomon's death, as I have told, neither officer nor soldier was willing to venture the dangers of battle. Most notably, John, son of Sisinolus, kept entirely from the field of war because of his hatred of Sergius, until Ariobanus came to Libya. This Sergius was a luxurious person and no soldier, juvenile in nature and years, a jealous and swaggering bully, a wanton liver, and a blowhard. But after became the accepted suitor of her niece, and was this related to Antonina, Belisarius' wife, the empress would not allow him to be punished or removed from his command, even when she saw Libya sure to be lost. And, with the emperor's consent, she even let Solomon, Sergius' brother, go scot-free after the murder of Pagasius. How this happened, I shall now relate. After Pagasius had ransomed Solomon from the Levitae, and the barbarians had gone home, Solomon, with Pagasius as his ransomer, and a few soldiers set out for Carthage. And on the way, Pagasius reminded Solomon of the wrong he had done, and said he should thank God for his rescue from the enemy. Solomon, vexed at being reproached for having been taken captive, straightway slew Pagasius. And this was his requital to the man who saved him. But when Solomon arrived in Constantinople, the emperor pardoned him on the ground that the man he killed was a traitor to the Roman state. So Solomon, thus escaping justice, left gladly for the east to visit his native country and his family. Yet God's vengeance overtook him on the very journey and removed him from the world of men. This is the explanation of the affair between Solomon and Pagasius. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the subsequent edifying, invigorating, ebullient, and effervescent episode of the Reading Cow from Another World with the Anecdota of Procopius, tales of yore, times long gone before, as a warner for whoso mightest be warned. Until the next time, join us again for the continuation of the Anecdota of Procopius. Let us meet again, and until that time, goodbye.